Hi, welcome to Navigating Special Education, Episode 1. My name is Mark Jones. I'll be your host. This episode is going to talk to you about why special education is actually there, why your child who has an IEP gets the services they do. I'm going to talk to you about the situation prior to 1975 that students with special needs were not served in public schools. They were housed in institutions. And I'm going to talk to you about a guy named Geraldo Rivera who did an expose in an institution called Willowbrook up in Staten Island, New York, where the conditions were deplorable. They were horrible. And that spurred on what special education is today. You may know it as No Child Left Behind. It was originally passed as a law in 1975. It was Public Law 94-142. That is the basis for everything you know as special education today. So I hope I can inform you and get you up to date on why you are entitled to a lot of different things and why your student has the IEP.
Good day to you. Welcome to Navigating Special Education. This is a first episode entitled Intros and Origins. Figured I better start off with informing you and let you know who you're talking to or who's doing the talking, because you want to be sure you're getting information from a legitimate, valid person. So I'm the host. My name's Mark Jones. Been a special education teacher for now 34 years and have a pretty wide variety of experiences within those 34 years. I am currently a emotional support teacher in a small approved private school, and I spend my days teaching every subject, every concept, collecting behavioral data, putting out behavioral fires through most of the day, and just simply enjoying every second of what I do. So this is a project. This podcast is a project, something that I've been thinking about for quite some time. I want to be able to share my experiences and share some knowledge that I have gained over those 34 years with those that either are special educators, administrators, parents, students, people who want to have a deeper understanding of what special education is and how to navigate it, hence the title. A little bit about me. I have a bachelor's degree in special education from Clarion University of Pennsylvania. Long time ago, obviously, at least 34 years ago. I hold a certification in middle level mathematics for the state of Pennsylvania. I have a master's degree from California University of Pennsylvania in educational leadership, which I earned in 2014. Have my principal certification. Used it a little bit, but my calling has been for the classroom for the largest portion of my career. My certifications are in the areas of middle level math, educational leadership, principal K through 12, and of course, on the title itself, it says mentally and or physically handicapped is the special education degree K through 12. Been through just a lot of different experiences, and the more experiences I have, the more I know that while I think I've seen a lot, I certainly haven't seen it all. Every day in the realm of special education and education in general is an adventure. It is a tale of what kids bring into the building with them on a daily basis, to be trauma informed, to be prepared to deal with overt, covert, aggressive, non-aggressive, passive-aggressive behaviors is something you have to have in your tool belt to be a special education teacher these days. And any teacher in general, anybody in education, there's a lot coming through the doors that we don't know. A lot of hunger, a lot of mental health issues, a lot of things that the kids bring in with them that make the educational process somewhat difficult to navigate. So once again, if I can help you as a parent, as a student, as another special education teacher or an administrator or anybody involved in even general education teachers, especially general education teachers, because it's difficult to navigate those special education guidelines and rules and IEPs and things of that nature. My motivation is just to share knowledge, experience, and passion for special education and education in general, to support parents, educators, students, paraprofessionals, anybody who wants to know. I'm not going to claim myself a total expert, but over the breadth of my career, I've learned some things, and I can hopefully help you out. And whether that's through affirmation, inspiration, confirmation of something you might be doing that's, in your opinion, better for your child or worse for your child, I'll hopefully be able to help you answer those sorts of things. Okay. The format. Each episode is going to focus on a specific concept or idea, or some form of what the nuts and bolts of special education are. I'm going to support with factual information. If I don't know something, I'm going to tell you here on the screen, and I'm going to later do more research or ask a colleague or read up, and I can get back to you on this format. I will offer an email address, navspedpod@gmail.com. I'll show you that later on in the podcast also, because I want to open this up to questions so I can help people to answer questions that they very well might have about something that's going on with their child's life, or as a special education teacher or general ed teacher, something that you're experiencing that you might need a little direction on. Further to talk about the format, I am going to have guest speakers, parents, fellow educators. At some point, I may actually get some students on here to talk about their real life experiences. And I want to open it up to very open dialogue and questions and knowledge, so you can be informed and make the best decision for your child, for your students, for yourself. Special education, I think, is always seen as a sort of an area that is set aside and just everybody just sort of pushes those kids to. And later on in this podcast, in particular, we will talk about exactly what the law states that special education should be, and I'm going to talk about the origin of things. That was part of the title, intros and origins. I'm knocking out the intro right now. The origin of special education is the next thing we're going to talk about, and it is something that had a very ugly meaning to it for a long time. And I'm going to share something with you right now to sort of lead us into our discussion about why special education is actually there. I'm going to show you exactly why special education is there. The first one here, from a very, very popular movie that everybody knows.
Your boy's different, Ms. Gump. His IQ is 75. The state requires a minimum IQ of 80 to attend public school, Mrs. Gump. He's gonna have to go to special school.
We're talking about 5 little points here. There must be something can be done.
We're a progressive school system.
Okay, so that in itself is a very telling thing. I realize the sound quality was probably not the best on that, but what was going on there is when little Forrest was first enrolled in school, which they do with every child, they're going to check their ability level. They're going to check their IQ. And prior to 1975, the school systems did not serve children with IQs lower than 75. It could be different in many states in different areas, but 75 was pretty much the cutoff because it is, if you don't know, an average IQ is 100. And a ranked or gifted IQ is anywhere from 120 to 125 up to 140, 150 in those areas. So 75 is a child that's going to struggle. They're going to struggle to learn to read and to be able to function within the goals and the areas that public schools demand that they meet. They're going to have to rise up rather than be able to just meet the goals with the gifts, with the intellectual ability that they have. So Forrest Gump, while it might be, it's just a movie, it's a fictional thing. It's a very true thing of how special education was handled prior, once again, to 1975. Kids were placed in institutions, in homes, in asylums, and they were just kept there. And they were, for the most part, probably not treated very well. That's probably an understatement. But I'm going to share some information here very shortly with you about a place called Willowbrook and a gentleman named Geraldo Rivera who did an expose on the place called Willowbrook. And this was indicative of how in the United States, children who were considered to be Down syndrome, spina bifida, any number of disabilities were treated. They may have been taken from the home. They may have gone back and forth on a daily basis to those schools, but most of them were there on a permanent basis. And what spurred on the public outcry for a law for special education services was this expose that I'll show you here in a minute by Geraldo Rivera. The kids were treated horribly. There were 5,300 students in this Willowbrook school in Staten Island, New York. And the staff to student ratio, they claimed, was at least 50 students to one staff. And if you can imagine having a child with a Down syndrome or any number of disabilities, and 50 to 1 is certainly not going to meet the needs of any child. You're not going to be able to meet the needs in physically, mentally caring. And it was a really horrible situation. So I'm going to share with you some things here pertaining to that. All right. Geraldo Rivera, shopping expose on Willowbrook, the turning point for disability rights. In 1972, journalist Geraldo Rivera, then a young reporter with WABC-TV, unveiled the horrific conditions at Willowbrook State School, a Staten Island institution for children with intellectual disabilities. The expose became a catalyst for reform, leading to the destructuralization movement and the passage of laws protecting individuals with disabilities, including the Education for All Handicapped Children Act 1975, otherwise known as Public Law 94-142. There. This is a picture of the situation in Willowbrook that was horrendous. Yeah, it looked like a nice Mickey Mouse there. But the children, as you can see here, were pretty much just laying around all day in carts on their backs. A lot of kids they found had flattened, their skulls were almost flattened in the back of their head because they were laying around all day and not being cared for. Another picture. This is Willowbrook here, a huge facility. It's again like 5,300 students, 50 to 1 staff to student ratio. They were housed. They were not treated as well as we could be. If you look at the number of cars in this parking lot here, that sort of shows you how understaffed it was. And it was a really, really deplorable situation. It was a rough place to be raised or to just be housed in. So back to Geraldo Rivera. He went and was given access to from a doctor or from people from within. There was a doctor who was encouraging parents to fight and to uh, to resist and pull their kids out of Willowbrook because the situation was so terrible. They had to get to a point where this expose had to happen in order for these kids to be served properly. So the doctor who was encouraging the parents to stand up and protest was fired. So he took it upon himself to allow Geraldo Rivera in to take a look around. I'm not going to share those videos with you because it's very disturbing. But you can sort of see from the pictures I shared earlier that this was a situation that was horrendous. It was really difficult for a child to prosper, for a child to feel loved, for a child to feel like they had any ray of hope to be educated, to even just to be fed properly, unclothed, unfed, unloved, really, really deplorable. And back to Forrest Gump. So that's why I shared Forrest Gump with you earlier. Once again, it's a fictional movie. If he would have been placed in that special school, he probably would have been in a situation like this where his needs were not being met. So this expose really pushed people to move to get their government to stand up and say, this is not right. This is something that should not be happening. Children with disabilities should not be excluded from public school. So there was a lot of talk and a lot of things going on in our government. And eventually in 1975, Public Law 94-142 was placed into law. And it was an important milestone in the history of our country. For the first time, children were going to be allowed to be educated in a public school setting. This was a historical situation that if it had not occurred, I don't know what would happen to a lot of these children. Eventually those children were pulled back out of that institution, and they were placed back in their public schools. I'm going to share once again with you the history of the Individuals with Disabilities Act. Now, question for you: do you know what IDEA is, or No Child Left Behind is? I'm sure you've heard of that. I'm sure you've heard of that within our, on the news now, and it's been re-upped. But IDEA, Individuals with Disabilities Act, or No Child Left Behind, is Public Law 94-142, just been regenerated and reapproved and had additions put into it. So a history of the Individuals with Disabilities Act. Congress enacted the Education for All Handicapped Act Children, Public Law 94-142, also known as EHA, in 1975 to support states and localities protecting the rights and meeting the individual needs and improving the results for infants, toddlers, children, and youth with disabilities and their families. The landmark law's name changed to Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, or IDEA, in 1990's reauthorization. The law was last reauthorized in 2004, and the department has periodically issued new or revised regulations to address the implementation and interpretation of the IDEA. Before EHA, many children were denied access to education and opportunities to learn. In 1970, U.S. schools educated only 1 in 5 children with disabilities, and many states had laws excluding certain students, including children who were deaf, blind, emotionally disturbed, or had an intellectual disability. Since the passage of EHA in 1975, significant progress has been made toward meeting major national goals for developing and implementing effective programs and services for early intervention, special education-related services. The U.S. has progressed from excluding nearly 1.8 million children with disabilities from public schools prior to EHA implementation and to providing more than 8 million children with disabilities with special education and related services designed to meet their individual needs in the 2022-23 school year. In 22-23, more than 66% of children with disabilities were in general education classrooms, 80% or more of their school day. In early events and services provided for more than 441,000 infants and toddlers with disabilities and their families. So pay attention to that, because if you are raising a child that you suspect is struggling to learn, struggling to walk, struggling to speak, struggling to master and toilet training, all those different things, you are entitled to some early intervention services through your local uh, local municipalities or county services. And at some point, we will get into describing exactly where to go, how to get to that, how to look for those, and how to make those happen for you and your child. Other accomplishments directly attributable to the IDEA include educating more children in their neighborhood schools rather than separate schools and institutions, and contributing to improvements in the rate of high school graduation, post-secondary school enrollment, and the post-school employment for youth with disabilities who have been identified from the IDEA. Major historical value to this law. It's been reauthorized a couple of times, given different names, but it's so important in the lives of children. So I could have just jumped in and started talking about IEPs and all the different things that special education have. You could start with just a number of different ways, but I felt it was important for folks to understand why, if you have a special education child, or if you have a child with special needs or receives specially designed instruction, this is why. This is the basis. This is the foundation for you to be able to understand why it's done. So I thought that was important. Key ideas. I'm going to share this screen here. Key ideas in Public Law 94-142. We're going to talk about that first one there. The first bullet: free appropriate public education, FAPE. FAPE is a thing that wasn't in place prior to this law. As stated in that last screen, a large percentage of the students were not served in a public school. 1 in 5 are not served in a public school. And for the more severe kids with intellectual disabilities, Down syndrome, a number of physical disabilities, they were not allowed in public schools. Some states didn't allow them in at all. They were sent to institutions like Willowbrook. So free appropriate public education, FAPE, is the most important tenet of the law, because it makes it illegal and makes it unconstitutional for folks to be eliminated from public school education based on what they bring to the table. You could have a learning disability, an emotional disability, emotional disturbance, any number of different things that a child can be afflicted with or could have based on how they were born, or how they've developed and how their brains are developed. Everybody's brain develops differently. Everybody is not a fluid reader. Everybody is not a fluid math fact cruncher. Everybody is not able to understand the nuances of behaviors and expectations in a public setting. So FAPE provides the opportunity for those folks who have, I want to say, disabilities, limitations, gaps in their learning, mental health issues, to still access that. And you have to thank Geraldo Rivera for having the guts to get up in there and expose that, because it really helped to spur along where we're at right now. The next tenet, bullet number 2, least restrictive environment. Every student is entitled to have their educational experience in the least restrictive environment. There's a continuum of services that are available to students that range anywhere from, on the far end, gifted. So students with those, we talked about those IQ scores. Students 130, 140, 150 IQs are also entitled to specially designed instruction to enhance their education. That's the top of the continuum of services. So you have kids who are gifted that need to be served in the least restrictive environment. And then you go down the continuum of services, and it goes from, once again, the least restrictive to the most restrictive environment. So in a public school setting, least restrictive environment indeed is in a seat in a general education classroom following the general education curriculum and standards that are set by the federal government and the states that you reside in. And the students are expected to meet those standards and become proficient in those standards. And every state, I'm sure, has a system of assessing that. In the state of Pennsylvania, where I'm at, you have the PSSA and the Keystone exams. And those are high stakes tests. The government looks at those, they publish those, and schools can show that they're making great progress or they're struggling in some areas. And the parents can look at that, and that's the public education portion of it. You have the opportunity to look and see where your child stands compared to maybe some nationwide standards or statewide standards. And more recently, there has been assessments developed for students who are intellectually disabled that have a need to have a altered test. That's called the PASA in Pennsylvania Alternative State Assessment. And there are certain qualifications that students have to have, and that's part of the IEP. And at some point, when I break down the IEP piece by piece, that'll be explained in more detail. So, least restrictive environment, back to that again. You have general education classroom. Then you're going to have next, it's a little bit more restrictive, where you're going to have a kid pulled out into a itinerant support system or a full-time support system. And the semantics on it are a little different. So if a kid really struggles, let's say with reading, they may have a child go to a special education support classroom to address the reading need or a mathematics need or a behavioral need. So that's the next step on the least restrictive environment. And then you're going to have, within a public school, you're going to have a full-time placement. And that's much more restrictive, where the kids are not in the general education curriculum. And there was a trend back in the 90s that was called mainstreaming. And it's still in place today. It's just may have a different name by now. But folks felt that the government felt and leaders felt that kids should be educated in their public schools in a general education curriculum as much as possible. So mainstream. There are some students, more of your life skills students who are intellectually disabled within a public school setting, have to be a little further down the restrictive environment to a more restrictive environment in a full-time pull-out classroom. Now, you always want to have the kids within those classes get as much general ed exposure as possible. There's a part in the IEP where you have to show how much of a percentage of their day is spent in general education. Then if it's not, then you have to provide justification in a written statement in that IEP that states why they are not in with the general education curriculum at that point, or in general education students at that point. A little further down the restrictive environment, where I deal with on a daily basis as an emotional support teacher at an approved private school, is an approved private placement away from the public school that they should be attending, but their disability or their classification or their emotional disturbance, or sometimes an autistic support type student has to be served, or it's more appropriately stated, they should be served in a more restrictive environment due to behaviors and the severe learning needs that they have based on mostly those behaviors. So that's the next step in the restricted environment. And that is pretty much the most restrictive environment. There are things that are further. There were where a child may be so behaviorally challenged that they're in a residential treatment facility, and that is the most restricted environment, because not only are they not living at home any longer, they're living in a very restricted environment in that residential treatment facility, and they're getting their education there also. So that's what the least restricted environment, LRE, means. We always, as a special education team, have to function with the child in the least restricted environment when appropriate, and that becomes a decision of the team. And the team, I'll talk about that in a minute here. when we get into the individualized education program, the team has to decide those things. And a little further down the line, there's procedural due process that results as a part of that process also. I'm going to talk about the IEP right now. Individualized Education Plan or Program. I always say plan, but program. It's just semantics. It is a document that is created from a system of assessment, from a system of discovering whether a child is what we say in education in need of specially designed instruction, SDI. There's a whole process that takes place for that, and I'll explain that in depth in a minute here. The Individualized Education Program is something that is a legally binding document, and there are some particular things that have to occur in order for the IEP to be properly done. And there are certain aspects of that have to occur for it to count, for it to legally take place. The Individualized Education Program has to have three factors to hold a meeting and for it to be signed into service. And that is, you have to have parent, you have to have what's called an LEA, Local Education Association representative. Usually it's a principal or a director of special education. School psychologist been serving this lot in this role. And then you have to have a special education teacher. Now, in a public school setting, you also have to have a general education teacher participate in the IEP process, and they have to provide information about the child. So that is the team constituency of an individualized education program, IEP. Now, you can invite anybody you want to that with parent permission and with school district consent. And you can invite outside agencies, outside counselors. You can invite school psychologists. You can invite speech pathologists, behavioral, BCBA, behavioral people who are going to contribute onto the IEP, occupational therapists, hearing impairment, visual impairment specialists, any number of different people. But the three main people in an IEP have to be the parent, the LEA, and the special education teacher who has designed and written the document. So back to the least restrictive environment, and now to the next bullet, due process. Parents may not agree with a child being placed at a residential treatment facility or an approved private program or approved private school. There is a due process in this whole deal. The way an IEP is written is we gather information with either a ER, evaluation report, or an RR. That's the first part of the IEP process that occurs, and those documents drive the IEP. When a child is considered to be special needs or in need of specially designed instruction, the law takes over. So, for instance, you have a first grader who's struggling to read, and a lot of times special education placements are going to come out of kindergarten, first, second grade, because they're learning to read first. They're learning to function within the school proper, and then learn, the expectations of behavior and the expectations of play and all those different things. And those teachers early on will see red flags. They'll see a child struggling to learn to read or to write or to function properly behaviorally within the ins and outs of the classroom. So there's a process that then occurs. Most folks know it as NTSS, multi-tier system of support in the elementary. And you're going to have that for the needs to be met of the students. You're going to see red flags. So you're going to send them through that NTSS process. The general education teacher is going to recommend them, and they're going to take a look at them, and they're going to provide support services. With those support services that they provide through Title I funding through the federal government or through any other number of means that you have in place, do not bring that student's levels up, then they're going to go and they're going to call a parent in, and they're going to recommend hey, we need to take a look at getting this child tested and generated from that testing from a school psychologist or a psychologist or any number of different entities. You're going to have a evaluation report. Any evaluation report is going to list a lot of information, and I'll break that down in a later episode as to exactly what is on an evaluation report. But for the purposes today, you're going to have a ton of information on there. You're going to interview the parent. You're going to interview the current teachers. You're going to talk about developmental milestones for children. When did they meet them? And it's going to give us information. And then they're going to do an IQ test, and they're going to be like, you're going to be facing a situation like Forrest Gump's mom faced. Well, you're looking at this IQ. Well, that qualifies them for specially designed instruction or special education services. You have that in there. Back to the procedural due process. Okay. You have done the ER, you've held the meeting, you've laid the information out, and within the ER, a recommendation is going to be made. This kid qualifies for special education services, or on the converse, they may not qualify for special education services. Attention deficit hyperactive disorder does not really qualify a child for special education services unless there's a huge gap in their learning. And so it gets into some gray areas, and it gets into situations where you might end up in a procedural due process hearing over a kid's placement or non-placement. And the IEP process, back up the line to least restrictive environment, allows for parents and schools to go through a due process hearing to either place a child, or for the parent to resist a placement, or for a parent to resist the movement up and down the least restrictive environment situation. And it may get into a point where they actually get into a hearing with an arbiter where the arbiter will decide on what's appropriate. And that's the other part of Public Law 94-142. It gave parents and schools, both sides, the opportunity to follow procedural due process to achieve what is best for the child. And those opinions vary. Sometimes parents' opinions vary dramatically away from what the school district's proposing. And the school might look at what a parent's recommending or what the parent wants and say, we don't think that's appropriate for your child. So there is due process in place. Part of that ER, and eventually it's called an RR, where you reevaluate, and there's certain timelines, which I'll get into at a later date. There are certain timelines that you have to follow to reevaluate a child's eligibility for special education. Some things may have changed. Their levels may have changed. They may have had different things occur in their lives. So there are time constraints and all that stuff. And the non-discriminatory assessment is intended to gather information and allow schools to be able to make a decision, to make a call on whether that kid is eligible for special education services or not. And that non-discriminatory assessment has to be done. The schools, most schools have a school psychologist, or you're going to have an intermediate unit somewhere along the line that's going to allow for a child to be non-discriminatory assessed, so we can make a true assessment of what their needs are and what they're going to need and what they're going to get as far as special education services. And the last bullet point there is parental participation in the whole process. Parents weren't, prior to 1975, and we watched Mrs. Gump there get her fight for her child, and the parental participation has to be there. They have to be involved in the whole process. They have to be part of the team in order for special education services to occur. They have to be included. They have to be notified. When you do an IEP, you have to send a written invitation to them. You have to be able to be able to document that. So they have been given the opportunity to know when the IEP meeting is going to occur, or a reevaluation meeting, or an evaluation report is going to be read. There are certain waivers sometimes that have to be signed based on the whole process, and they're an essential part of this whole thing. And prior to that, my parents were pretty much just told, well, your child is special. We're going to send them here, and you don't have any choice. Law states this is what's going to happen. Well, 1975, that changed. That whole climate changed. So the key elements of Public Law 94-142 are these 6 bullet points here. And underlying the whole thing is just basic human decency. Where in somebody's mind would you want to just send a kid away and not give them the training, the skills that they need? A lot of people see special education as a different area in the building that kids can just go and you don't have to worry about them. That's not the way it should be. As a special educator for a long, long time, I never looked at a student and said they can't do it. There's always a way for them to do it. There's always a way for them to learn. There's always a way for them to participate. There's always a way for them to get a meaningful education. And there are some very severe disabilities and kids out there in the world with very severe disabilities, but you can still always find a way for them to have progress and growth, and for them to be able to be included in the process. So this has been my life's work. And this is why I'm sitting here, taking time from my day to share this information with you, because I want you to understand where your kid is, where your child is, if they have an IEP, or if a school has approached you and said, we think your child needs special education services. This is the history behind it. This is what you are entitled to. This is what you should be doing as a parent, and insisting that due process be followed if you don't agree, or insisting on the least restricted environment, or insisting that your child has a free, appropriate public education. And the folks that wrote this law were very bright, were very well informed about what had been happening in the past. And they took the time, and obviously it took, Geraldo Rivera's report was in 1972. It took 3 years to get this all put into place. And I'm thankful every day as a special education teacher to do that. I rambled on pretty well here. So future episodes, I'm going to go in depth into a lot of different areas. I want to show you the evaluation system, why schools do what they do, why they have those in place, and what tools they use to do that. I want to show you the meats and the meat, potatoes, nuts and bolts of an IEP, what you should be looking for, what you should be focusing on when you are sitting across the table or sitting on a screen like we are right now. What those things actually mean that are written in an IEP. What is the present levels of functional performance? What is the present levels of academic achievement? What is a transition plan? What is a PBSP, a positive behavior support plan? What should you know? What should you do? What should you insist to have on? What should you as a parent be asking? And what are you entitled to? There's a lot of entitlements. And what avenues can you take if you are not satisfied with what the school district's providing for you? There might be something that you didn't know. There might be something that you weren't aware of in your due process rights. You might have not been included in an invitation, and it may have been missed. You have to be aware of what you are entitled to. And if I can help you with that, providing information, inspiration for you, and sometimes confirmation. Sitting here, you might have not realized this is why my child has the services they do. So I felt it was very important to do that. So I'm going to stop sharing here. Let's back here. Okay. So just a little proof of who I am. This is my master's degree in from California University, Pennsylvania. Wife not likes doing that. So that's a little proof of who I am, where I've been. I want you to know that you have an advocate here, somebody that wants to help. This is such an important part of a child's life and your life as a parent, and you have to know what to do and how to handle it. And I may have an answer for you. And if I can't give it to you right away, I'm going to go try to find it for you. My email address is nav, N-A-V, sped, S-P-E-D, pod, P-O-D, at gmail.com. navspedpod at gmail.com. If you have questions, comments, concerns, feel free to ask. I'll gladly answer them for you. Next episode, we'll come up with a topic to talk about in navigating special education, and we can dive into learning to help people. Because in future episodes, I want to start inviting guests. I want to talk to people about their experiences, parents, fellow educators, administrators, students. I think that would be probably a very powerful thing to have a student on here to talk about their experiences and how it's shaped them, how it's helped them. So for now, I'm going to bid you adieu. Once again, navspedpod, NAVSPEDPOD at gmail.com. Any questions, concerns, ask, and I want to help you. I'm here for you. Have a good day.